Hello everyone. Today we will study about electronic mail or email. Electronic mail or email allows user to exchange messages. The nature of this application, however, is different from other applications that we discussed. In the sense, in an application such as HTTP or FTP, the server program is running all the time, waiting for a request from a client. When the request from a client arrives, the server provides the service. There is a request and there is a response. But in the case of electronic mail, the situation is completely different. First, email is considered a one way transaction. If I consider Alice and Bob as sender and receiver, when Alice sends an email to Bob, she may expect a response, but this is not a compulsion. Bob may or may not respond. If he does respond, it is another one way transaction. So, second type is that it is neither feasible nor logical for Bob to run a server program and wait until someone sends an email to him. Bob may turn off his computer when he is not using it. So, this means that the idea of client or server programming should be implemented in some other way using some intermediate computers or using some servers. The users run only client programs when they want, and the intermediate servers apply the client server paradigm. Coming to the architecture of an email system, here we are considering a common scenario. The sender and the receiver of the mail, Alice and Bob, are connected via a LAN or a WAN to two mail servers. The administrator has created one mailbox for each of these users where the received messages are stored. A email box or a mailbox is a part of a server hard drive or a special file with certain permission restrictions. Only the owner of the mailbox has an access to it. The administrator has also created a spool to store messages waiting to be sent. That spool we can see between MTA client and MTA server in the mail server. A simple email from Alice to Bob usually takes 9 different steps, as we can see here from left to right. But it has three different agents. In the sense, Alice and Bob use three different agents for this. One is user agent, that is UA, message transfer agent, MTA, and a message access agent, that is MAA. When Alice needs to send a message to Bob, she runs a UA program to prepare the message and send it to her mail server. Now, the mail server at her site uses a spool to store messages waiting to be sent. The message, however, needs to be sent through the internet from Alice's site to Bob's site using MTA. Here, we are using two message transfer agents, one client and one server. Like most client server programs on the internet, the server needs to run all the time because it does not know when the client will ask for a connection. The client, on the other hand, can be triggered by the system when there is a message in the queue to be sent. The user agent at the Bob's site allows Bob to read the received message, whereas the Bob later uses an MAA client to retrieve the message from an MAA server running on the second server. First, Bob cannot bypass the mail server and use the MTA server directly, and to use the MTA server directly, the Bob would need to run the MTA server all the time because he does not know when a message will arrive. From this, we can say that Bob must keep his computer on all the time if he is connected to his system through a LAN. If he is connected through a WAN, then he must keep connection up all the time. But usually these things cannot happen. So Bob needs another pair of client server programs such as message access programs. This is because an MTA client to server program is a push program. The client pushes the messages to the server, whereas Bob needs a pull program. The client needs to pull the messages from the server. Now, coming to the user agent, this is the first component of an email system. It provides services to the user to make the process of sending and receiving a message easier. Usually, this user agent is a software package, or we can call it as a program, which composes, reads, replies, and forwards the messages. It usually handles local mailboxes on the user computers. Actually, we have two types of user agents. One is command driven, whereas another one is graphical user interface, that is GUI based. Command driven user agents belong to the early days of electronic mail. They are still present as the underlying user agents. A command driven user agent normally accepts one character command from the keyboard to perform its task, whereas modern user agents are GUI based. They contain graphical user interface components that allows the user to interact with the software by using both the keyboard and the mouse. They will have certain graphical components such as icons, menu bars, windows that make the servers easy to access. Coming to the format and sending of a mail. Here, format of an email is given. Sending mail. To send a mail, the user through the user agent creates the mail that looks very similar to our postal mail. So you can see a format of postal mail and an electronic mail. It has an envelope and a message. The envelope usually contains the sender address, the receiver address, and other information. The message contains the header and the body of the message. The header of the message defines the sender, the receiver, the subject of the message, and some other information. The body of the message contains the actual information to be read by the recipient. For receiving mail, the user agent is triggered by the user. If a user has a mail, the user agent informs the user with a notice. If the user is ready to read the mail, a list is displayed in which each line contains a summary of the information about a particular message in the mailbox. Usually, the summary includes the sender mail address, the subject, and the time the mail was sent or received. This, the user can select any of the messages and display its content on the screen. And coming to the email address, to deliver mail, a mail handling system must use an addressing system with certain unique addresses. In the internet, usually address consists of two parts, a local part and a domain name. Usually these two are separated by an at symbol. So it will be like local part at domain name. The local part defines the name of a special file called the user mailbox. In this, all the mail received by a user will be stored for retrieval by the message access agent. The second part of the address is the domain name. As I told you earlier, an organization usually selects one or more hosts to receive and send email. They are sometimes called mail servers or exchanges. Electronic mail usually allows one name and alias to represent several different email addresses. We will call this as mailing list. Every time a message is to be sent, the system checks the recipient's name against the alias database. If there is a mailing list for the defined alias, separate messages, one for each entry in the list, must be prepared and it should be handed to the MTA. Based on the common scenarios, what we have discussed, we can say that email is one of those applications that needs three uses of client server paradigm to accomplish its task. So here in the next particular figure, protocols used in electronic mail is shown. The formal protocol that defines the MTA client and server in the internet is called as SMTP. The full form of it is Simple Mail Transfer Protocol. Usually, SMTP is used two times between sender and the sender's mail server and between the two mail servers. Another protocol is also needed between mail server and the receiver that we will see later. Usually SMTP simply defines how many commands and responses must be sent back and forth. SMTP uses commands and responses to transfer messages between an MTA client and MTA server. The command is from an MTA client to an MTA server. The response is from an MTA server to the MTA client. There are multiple SMTP commands such as hello, mail from, RCPT to data, everything. This you can refer from the textbook. Coming to the responses also, there are different codes. Responses are sent from server to the client. A response is a 3-digit code. Usually that code may be followed by certain additional textual information. These codes and the corresponding description you can find it in your textbook. But now we are moving to the important phase, that is the mail transfer phase. The process of transferring a mail occurs in three phases. As we all know, before we were studying about data transfer, there the connection establishment, data transfer and termination was there. So similarly here also we have connection establishment, mail transfer and connection termination. Coming to the connection establishment, after a client has made a TCP connection to the port 25, that is a well-known port, the SMTP server starts the connection phase. Usually this involves three steps. First, the server sends a code, that is 220, that means service ready code, to tell the client that it is ready to receive the mail. If the server is not ready, it will send a 421 code, that is for service not available. The next step is that the client sends the hello message, that is HELO message, to identify itself using its domain name address. This step is very much necessary to inform the server of the domain that the domain name of the client. So this step is very important to inform the server of the domain name of the client. Coming to the third step or the last step of connection establishment, here the server responds with code 250, that is for request command completed or some other code depending upon the situation. Now, once that connection is established, now we are moving for message transfer. After connection has been established, a single message between sender and one or more recipients can be exchanged. Usually, this message transfer involves 8 steps. Steps 3 and steps 4 are usually repeated if there is more than one recipient. Now, coming to these 8 steps. The first step is that the client sends the mail from message to introduce the sender of the message. It includes mail address of the sender, that is mailbox and the domain name. This step is very much required to give the server the return mail address for returning any errors and reporting messages. Coming to the second step, the server responds with a code 250 or some other appropriate code that is chosen based on the situation. The client, coming to the third step, the client sends the recipient message which includes the mail address of the recipient. Fourth step is that the server responds with code 250 or some other appropriate code. And fifth step is that The client sends the data message to initialize the message transfer. Coming to the sixth step, the server responds with a code 354, that is to indicate start mail input or some other appropriate message. Coming to the seventh step, or the last but one important step, the client sends the contents of the message in consecutive lines, whereas each line is terminated by a two-character end of line token. The message is terminated by a line containing just one period. Coming to the last step, the server responds with code 250. That means it is okay or some other appropriate code depending upon the situation. Now we have completed message transfer as well. Coming to the connection termination. After message transfer, we have to terminate the connection. This involves two steps. That is, the client sends the quit command and the server responds with a code that is 221 or some appropriate other codes. This will end or terminate the connection. Now coming to the message access agents, we have POP3 or IMAP. The first and second stages of mail delivery, as we all know, it used SMTP. However, it is not involved in the third stage because SMTP is a push protocol. That means it will push the messages from the client to the server. On the other hand, at the third stage we require a pull protocol where the client must pull message from the server. Currently, two message access protocols are available for us, that is POP3, POP3, that means Post Office Protocol version 3, and IMAP4, which is Internet Mail Access Protocol version 4. Coming to this Post Office Protocol version 3, it is simple but it limited in certain functionalities. The client POP3 software, it is usually installed on the recipient computer. The server POP3 software is installed on the mail server. Here, mail access starts with the client when the user needs to download its email from the mailbox on the mail server. Here, the client opens a connection to the server on TCP port number 110. After that, it then sends its username and password to access that particular mailbox. It is shown the user can then list and retrieve the mail messages one by one. Here, in this particular figure, an example for downloading the message using POP3 is shown. POP3 has two modes. One is delete mode and one more is keep mode. In delete mode, the mail is deleted from the mailbox after each retrieval, whereas in the keep mode, the mail remains in the mailbox after retrieval. The delete mode, it is normally used when the receiver is working at his or her permanent computer and can save and organize the received mail after reading or replying. Whereas the keep mode is normally used when the user accesses his or her mail away from his or her primary computer. The mail is read, but it is kept in the system for later retrieval and organizing. Now coming to IMAP4. IMAP4 or Internet Mail Access Protocol 4 is similar to POP3 but it has certain more features. It is more powerful and it is complex. IMAP4 provides certain extra functions such as a user can check the email header prior to downloading the email. A user can search the contents of the mail for specific string. A user can partially download an email if the bandwidth is limited and the email contains certain multimedia with high bandwidth requirements, and a user can create, delete or rename their mailboxes on the mail server, and also a user can create hierarchy of mailboxes in a folder for email storage. Now coming to the multi-purpose internet mail extensions MIME. It is a supplementary protocol that allows non-ASCII data to send from to be sent through an email. For example, this will transform a non-ASCII data at the sender to NVT ASCII data as shown and delivers it to the client MTA to be sent through the internet. The message at the receiving site is transformed back to the original data. The MIME representation is given here. Actually, this MIME is having 5 headers. Okay, and MIME headers are there and we will see the description of them. First one, in the header we have MIME version. This header defines the version of the MIME that is used. The current version which is given in the textbook is 1.1. The next header type is content type. This header defines the type of the data that is used in the body of the message. Coming to the third header, content transfer encoding. This header defines the method used to encode the messages into zeros and ones for transport purpose. And next we have certain encoding methods. See here under this content transfer encoding, we have two encoding methods at the end. They are usually we have certain encoding methods such as 7-bit, 8-bit, binary, base 64, quoted printable like that. In base 64 encoding, data as a string of bits is considered and it is first divided into 6-bit chunks. And each of those 6-bit sections will be converted into ASCII character. Okay. Now, usually this base 64, it is a redundant encoding scheme. That is, every 6 bits become one ASCII character and are sent as 8 bits. Okay. Now, there is one more field that is content ID. And before going for that, I told you last two encoding methods are interesting. One is base 64 I told, and there is one more type that is quoted printable. So in this type, what happens? Any guesses? In quoted printable, if a character is ASCII, it is sent as it is. If a character is not ASCII, it is sent as 3 characters. The first character is equal sign, whereas the next two characters are set an hexadecimal representation of that particular byte. Okay. Now coming to the next header, that is content ID. This header uniquely identifies the whole message in a multiple message environment. And coming to the last header, that is content description. This header will define whether the body is a image or it is a audio or whether it is a video. Now we have web-based mail. If you want examples for this, such as Hotmail, Yahoo, Google Mail, everything. Okay. Now, here if you see, there are two cases. In the first case, as we can see, Alice, the sender uses traditional mail server. Bob, the receiver has an account on a web-based server. Mail transfer between Alice browser to her mail server is done through SMTP. The transfer of the message from the sending mail server to the receiving mail server is still through SMTP. But the message from the receiving server to Bob's server is done through HTTP. I can say instead of our POP3 or IMAP4, we are now using HTTP. When Bob needs to retrieve his mails, he will send a request HTTP message to websites. The website sends a form to be filled in by the Bob, which includes the login name and certain password and all. If the login name and password will match, the list of emails is transferred from web server to Bob's server using HTML format. Now, Bob can browse through his received mails list and then using some more HTTP transaction can get his mails one by one. If I go to the second case, that is case 2, both Alice and Bob use web servers, but not necessarily the same server. They may use different one. Alice sends the message to the web server using HTTP transactions. Alice sends an HTTP request message to her web browser using the name and address of Bob's mailbox as the URL. The server at the Alice site passes the message to the SMTP client and sends it to the server at the Bob's site using SMTP protocol. Bob will receive the message using HTTP transactions. However, the message from the server at the Alice site to the server at the Bob site still takes place using SMTP protocol. This is about web-based mail. Coming to the security in email. The protocol discussed in this chapter usually does not provide any separate security provisions. However, email exchanges can be secured using two application layer securities that is designed particularly for email system. They are PGP, Pretty Good Privacy, and there is one more, Secure Multi-Purpose Internet Mail Extension, that is SMIME. For secure transport, we have TLS or SSL. Coming to the summary, we have studied email, which is a client server system built on user agent, MTA and MEAA functions. We studied about SMTP, POP3, IMAP4, and we studied about MIME. We studied about webmail and security protocols. Thank you.